The boy smelled like river clay and pine smoke, and Mira pressed her face into his dark hair while the fire in the iron grate burned down to orange and ash. 7 years of this. 7 years of hauling water from the creek in the hollow below. 7 years of patching the same 3 walls against the same cold wind that came down off the ridge every October like it had a grudge. 7 years since the Duskmoor pack had walked her to the eastern border at dusk, 4 of them holding torches, none of them looking her in the eye, and told her that the territory no longer recognized her existence. She had been 22, 4 months pregnant. The mark they cut into her left wrist to sever the pack bond had taken 3 weeks to stop weeping. The cabin had not been built for anyone. It had been built for seasons, a hunting shelter, a place to wait out storms. She found it the second night after the banishment, half buried in bracken fern, the door missing entirely, a pair of dead ravens on the floor, like someone had forgotten to collect them. She had slept with her back against the stone foundation and her knees pulled to her chest and one hand on her stomach and thought, "This is not where we die." She had no evidence for this. She said it anyway. Now the boy was 6, nearly 7. Jasper slept with his mouth slightly open and his brow furrowed even in sleep, as though his dreams required concentration. He had learned to read at 4, teaching himself from the 3 books she had salvaged from a collapsed way station 2 winters past. A surveyor's guide, a collection of old folk tales, and something that claimed to be a military history, but was mostly a list of names. He read all 3 until the spines cracked, and then he read them again. He did not ask for more books the way other children might have asked. He simply waited, with the patience of someone who understood that wanting and having were different things, and had made his peace with the distance between them. The problem was his eyes, not dark brown like Mira's, not the warm amber common to Duskmoor wolves. Jasper's eyes were the pale gold of winter sunlight through ice, almost colorless at certain angles with a ring of copper so deep it looked burnt around the iris. She had seen those eyes once before. Once. In a room that smelled like wood smoke and old stone, during a border summit that the Duskmoor Alpha had attended as a courtesy and she had attended as the Alpha's household staff, carrying water pitchers and trying to take up as little space as possible. She had seen those eyes in the face of the man who did not belong in any room he walked into, because every room he entered immediately reorganized itself around him. The Lord of the Stonebreak territory, Orrin Vale. His name was not spoken in Duskmoor so much as exhaled. Always quietly, always with some edge of caution the way you spoke of weather systems and debt. The morning came cold, as mornings in the highlands always did, a cold that had texture to it, that you could feel against your teeth when you breathed. Mira untangled herself from the boy and set her feet on the stone floor and stood before she let herself think about anything else. Because thinking before standing was how you stayed horizontal. The creek was a 1/4 mile down through the birches. She carried the clay jugs the same way she always had, one in each hand, arms slightly out for balance on the slope that turned slick when the frost came. The path was hers. She had worn it into the hillside the same way water wears stone, not by force but by persistence, the same steps, the same weight, 7 years of the same intention. The birches were silver in the early light. A raven watched her from the high branch with the indifferent attention of something that understood it would outlast her. She filled the jugs. The water was cold enough to ache in her knuckles. She watched her reflection in the current come apart and reform and come apart again, and thought, not for the first time, that she looked like a woman who had been left afield and rained on. She was 29 years old. She felt like she had been alive for much longer. The walk back was uphill and her shoulders burned. When she crested the rise and saw the cabin, Jasper was already in the doorway, barefoot on the stone threshold with his pale gold eyes fixed on the tree line to the north, and his small body held the way his body always held when he was tracking something he hadn't named yet. Very still, weight forward, jaw set. "Mum," he said. "Something's wrong with the air." She set the jugs down. "Wrong how?" He tilted his head. like when lightning is going to happen, but there's no clouds, and underneath it, he struggled. Underneath it smells like someone important, not Pack, something older than Pack. Mira went still in the particular way she had learned on the mountain. Not rigid, not tense, but perfectly quiet, every part of her listening at once. She had developed this the way she had developed everything out here. Out of necessity. "Get your boots," she said. "But your boots, Jasper." And the grey Pack, behind the firewood. He went, he did not argue. He was 6, and he had been raised by a woman who said what she meant, and he had learned early that when her voice went flat like that, not angry, just flat, like a stone laid down, it was time to move. The grey Pack had lived behind the firewood for 4 years. Dried meat, a knife, a fire kit, the boy's heavy wool jacket, a small pouch of coins she'd accumulated from 3 seasons of trading pelts at the waystation market 2 days east. She had packed it the same night she first saw soldiers' tracks in the snow above the ridge, and she had repacked it every spring since then, replacing what had dried out or spoiled, keeping it current the way she kept her snares current, the way she kept everything, not from hope but from the discipline of a woman who could not afford to be caught unprepared. "We're taking a walk," she told him. He looked at the Pack, looked at her face. The long kind? She had taught him this. She was not proud of it, exactly. Teaching a child that some walks were survival walks, that some departures might not end in return. It was not the childhood she would have chosen to give him. But the mountain had been a more honest teacher than she could manage to be, and she had learned from it that pretending safety was its own kind of cruelty. "Yes," she said, "the long kind." He reached under the sleeping pallet and pulled out his own small bundle. She had not told him to keep one. He had assembled it himself over 2 years. A folding knife she'd given him for his 5th birthday, a piece of obsidian he'd found in the creek bed, the 3 ruined books wrapped in oilskin. She looked at the bundle and felt something in her chest that she did not have time for. They moved east, then cut north along the deer trails that ran above the frost line, where the scent dispersed faster in the wind. She carried him on her back through the steepest sections, his arms around her neck, his chin tucked against her shoulder, and he did not complain even when the grade made her breathing ragged. He weighed more than he used to. They all did, eventually. They walked for 2 hours. The sun came up properly and turned the frost to water, and the highland went from white to gold and green. Mira's boots were wearing through at the heel, and she could feel the ground through the leather, every root and stone, and she filed that information away for later, because later was the only place she had room for it. Then Jasper said, from behind her ear, "There are 3 of them, ahead and left, behind the deadfall." She stopped. He was already sliding down from her back, landing soft the way he always landed, the way young wolves landed before they understood what they were. She counted the seconds. 4, 5. A woman stepped out from behind the fallen spruce. 2 more behind her. They wore dark traveling clothes, no insignia she could read from here, but they moved with the coordinated ease of people who had been trained to move together. Feet quiet, weight low, eyes tracking. The woman in front was perhaps 40, with grey threaded through her close-cut dark hair and a scar across her chin that had healed at an angle. She looked at Mira with a measuring expression, the kind that did not bother to disguise itself as anything else. "Traveling light," she said, "for someone this deep in the highlands." "Passing through," Mira said, "with a child." The woman's eyes moved to Jasper. They stayed there. Jasper did not hide behind Mira. He stood slightly to her left with his arms at his sides and looked at the woman with those pale gold eyes. And the woman looked back, and something happened to her face. Not quickly, not dramatically, but the way ice on a pond makes that first sound before it gives. A settling, a recognition. She looked at the man beside her. Something passed between them, a question and its answer. "Hail," the woman said quietly. The man beside her came forward and looked at Jasper. He looked for a long time. The color left his face in degrees. "Those eyes," he said. "They're his," the woman said. "That's not." He glanced at Mira. "How old?" 6, Mira said. 6 and 10 months. The woman absorbed this the way you absorb a blow you half expected, without going down, but without pretending it didn't land either. You need to come with us, she said. Mira already had the knife in her hand. I don't need to do anything. That's fair. The woman's voice was calm. She did not look at the knife with fear, which told Mira something useful. My name is Tiele. I am someone who works very closely with a man whose son is standing beside you. And I need you to understand that coming with us is the better of your options, because the other option is that he finds you on his own. And his finding things on his own tends to involve a great deal of property damage. Mira looked at her. She looked at the boy. She looked at the tree line. She thought about the cabin, about the path worn into the hillside, about the pack behind the firewood that she had been refilling for 4 years. She thought about Jasper's eyes. She said, if he frightens my son, I will burn his territory to the ground. Tiel looked at her for a long moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Fair, she said again. They walked north for the rest of the day. The landscape shifted from highland scrub to older forest, the trees widening and darkening, their roots buttressing up through the soil in formations that looked deliberate. Jasper walked beside Tiele for the last hour, asking her questions about the root systems he observed, and Tiele answered everyone with the specific patience of a person who respected serious questions from small people. Mira walked behind and listened and felt the mate bond she had denied for 7 years pulling in her sternum like a fishhook, steady and directional and north. She had known what it was the night it happened. She had been 19 when Orin Vale walked through the summit hall, and the whole world rearranged its priorities, but she had been low-ranking enough, and frightened enough, and alone enough that the knowledge had come with nowhere to go. She had felt the pull, and she had told herself it was nerves. She had told herself it was proximity to power. She had told herself a great many things on the walk home from that summit, and she had kept telling herself those things through the weeks that followed, until she had no room left to tell them. By then she was already showing. The Duskmoor Alpha had not asked who the father was. She thought about it now, walking north through the old growth, whether the Alpha had known. Whether the bond scar on her wrist had told the story more clearly than she realized. Whether the decision to cut her out and send her walking had been less about propriety and more about fear. A low-ranking Omega carrying an heir to the Stonebreak territory. What that child would be. What that child would mean. She looked at Jasper walking beside Tiel, naming the species of mushrooms on the fallen logs as they passed them. She understood, suddenly and completely, that she had known this was coming, not consciously, not in the way of plans or decisions, but the pack behind the firewood. The path memorized, the long walk. She had been preparing for this for 4 years. The Stonebreak camp was in a river valley that narrowed into something almost like a corridor, the stone walls rising on both sides, the river loud and cold at the center. Military tents in weathered canvas, horses along the near bank, the smell of wood smoke and oiled metal, and the specific quality of quiet that happens in camps where people are competent and don't need to make noise to feel important. Tiel brought them to the largest tent and told 2 guards something too quiet for Mira to hear. She turned to Mira. He'll want to see you without the soldiers present, she said, and there's something you should know before you go in. He has been. She paused, choosing the word carefully. He has been looking, not searching. He doesn't know what he's looking for. But his wolf has been unsettled for 7 years, and he is not a man who tolerates being unsettled. And it has made him difficult, and I need you to know that what you're about to see in there is not what he is, only what he has been. Mira looked at her. Why are you telling me this? Because someone should have told me before I took this job, Tiele said, and because the boy deserves a father who isn't introduced at his worst. Mira knelt and pulled Jasper close. She said quietly and directly, the way she said everything, whatever happens in there, you stay with me until I tell you otherwise. You don't speak first, you watch. Do you understand? He considered this. Is it him? The one whose smell is on everything. She frowned. What smell? It's been getting stronger since we started walking this morning. He searched for the description. Like the inside of a stone building in summer, warm and old, and something under it like when you split wood and the heartwood is still wet. Something that shouldn't be warm but is. Mira closed her eyes for 1 second. 1 second was all she allowed. She stood up. Yes, she said. It's him. The tent interior was lit with oil lamps and dominated by a table covered in maps and dispatch notes, the debris of a campaign in its final stages. 2 men stood at the table. One was large in the way that alpha wolves were large, broad through the shoulders, built for endurance, carrying himself with the economical posture of someone who had been trained to conserve effort for when it was needed. The other man was what happened when you put all of that in a frame that was too large for most rooms, and then added a quality of stillness so complete that the concept of motion seemed like something that happened to other people. He stood at the far end of the table with one hand resting on the map's edge, reading, and he did not look up immediately when they entered, and Mira was grateful for those 3 seconds because it gave her time to do the thing she had been telling herself she could do, which was to stand in the same room as Orin Vale and not feel the mate bond ignite like something dropped in oil. She was not entirely successful. Then he looked up, the eyes, pale gold, almost colorless, copper ring like a burn scar around the iris. Jasper's eyes, looking at Mira out of a face that had been carved by wind and consequence into something that was not handsome so much as permanent, the look of something that had been tested by force for a long time and had not given way. He looked at her. The hand on the map tightened. The stillness around him changed quality, went from calm to contained, which was a different thing entirely. Then his gaze moved to Jasper. It stayed there. A muscle moved in his jaw. Once, twice. Out, he said. The word was quiet, and it emptied the tent immediately. TL lingered. The child. TL. She went. The tent flap settled. The lamps flickered in the displaced air. And then it was Mira and her son, and the lord of the Stonebreak territory, and the silence had the weight of 7 years compressed into it. He came around the table. He moved with care, the way you move in the vicinity of something you are afraid of damaging. He stopped 8 feet away and looked at Jasper with an expression Mira had no language for, because it contained too many things at once. Recognition and grief and something feral and barely managed that was not directed outward but inward at himself. Jasper looked back at him without fear. He has your eyes, Mira said. She had not intended to say it first. It came out anyway. Orin looked at her. Something moved behind the gold, something that was not political or calculated, something that lived below all of that. How old? He said. 6. 6 years and 10 months. She watched him do the arithmetic, watched him go somewhere behind his face while he did it, and watched what came back. He said, the Duskmoor Summit, 7 years ago, the hall with the broken hearth. Yes, you were. He stopped. You were staff. I was carrying water pitchers and trying to disappear, Mira said. I was very good at disappearing. Something crossed his face. Shame, maybe, or the precursor to it. He swallowed. They sent me away afterward, she said. When I started showing, Duskmoor decided I was a liability. They cut my pack bond and walked me to the eastern border at dusk and told me to keep moving. I was 4 months along. He made a sound then that was not a word. It came from somewhere below language, from the part of him that was wolf and not man, and it was low enough that Mira felt it in the bones of her jaw. The lamps shivered. A cup skated across the table. He turned away. Both fists went to the table, and he stood with his head down and his back to her, and the muscles in his shoulders moved like tectonic plates settling. And Mira understood that she was watching a man choose, very deliberately, not to destroy everything within reach. Jasper walked forward. She reached for him. He slipped past her hand with the liquid quickness he'd always had, that quality of movement she had never been able to fully account for, and he walked directly to the very large, very dangerous man, vibrating with barely leashed fury at the table, and he stood next to him and looked up. You smell like the books, Jasper said. Orin looked down. The fury drained from his face in one motion, like water leaving a vessel, and what was left underneath was something raw and unprepared and almost unbearable to look at. He lowered himself to one knee, slowly, like a man afraid of scaring something that could still run. He was eye level with his son. The same eyes met each other. Gold on gold, copper ring on copper ring. Orin raised one hand. He moved it toward Jasper's face with the carefulness of a man who understood that there were things in the world that did not survive being held wrong. He stopped with his fingers an inch from the boy's cheek, and he looked at Mira, may I? 2 words. They arrived in Mira's chest, like a key in a lock she had forgotten she had installed. No one, not the Duskmore elders, not the waystation traders, not the pack healer who had helped her through a labor that lasted 2 days and left her unable to stand straight for a week. Not one person in 7 years had asked her permission for anything regarding herself or her son. She nodded. His thumb brushed Jasper's cheekbone. Jasper looked at him with the steady, assessing attention he gave to things he was still categorizing, and then something in the boy's expression decided, and he leaned into the touch the way you lean into warmth you have been standing near for a long time before you let yourself admit you were cold. They gave her a tent with a cot and a wool blanket and a brazier that actually drew properly. They brought food, a stew with real vegetables, bread that had been baked that morning, a cup of something hot that tasted like cloves and honey. Mira ate, slowly and deliberately, tasting each thing, letting the warmth move through her chest and settle there. Jasper ate beside her with the focused efficiency of a child who had never fully trusted that there would be enough. And she watched him and felt the familiar ache of knowing that she had done everything she could, and it had still not been enough to keep that from him. "But you're still here," she told herself. "Both of you." She had been saying this for 7 years. It had not stopped being true. That night, she could not sleep. She wrapped herself in the wool blanket and stepped outside and stood in the cold air between the tents and looked at the river and the stars. Orin was standing 30 feet away. He was not pretending to be there for any other reason. He was simply standing, facing her tent, the same way a compass needle faces north. Not because it chooses to, because that is what it does. "You've been out here for 2 hours," she said. He said, "I stand where I need to." She walked toward him because the ground was cold and there was no point in speaking across a distance. She stopped at arm's length and they regarded each other in the dark and the firelight. He said, 7 years, you were in the highlands 7 years. Yes, alone, mostly. There's a woman at the waystation market who I trade pelts with. She taught Jasper to play stones. There's a raven that follows me when I check the snares. That's about the extent of it. Something moved in his face. He said, "After the summit, I went back to the Duskmore territory. A week later, I asked about the staff, specifically about the woman who had." He stopped. "About a woman I had met. They told me no one matched that description. They told me there had been no event, no meeting, nothing to report. And I knew they were lying, and I had no proof, and I had a territorial crisis developing to the west, and I—" "And you left," Mira said. "I know. I'm not telling you this to hold it. Then why? Because I need you to understand who I was then, so you understand who you're actually talking to now. I was 22, and I had no wolf to speak of, and I was frightened of what the bond meant, and I didn't know how to say any of that. And then I was 22 and pregnant and alone on a mountain, and I had to become someone who wasn't frightened. Because frightened people don't survive winters at elevation with an infant." She looked at him. The firelight found the planes of his face and made them angular and strange. "I need you to want the person who came out of that," she said. "Not the girl in that hallway. She is not someone I can be again." He was quiet for a long time. The river moved. An owl called once from the dark tree line. "I don't remember the girl," he said. "I remember a pull so strong I thought something structural had given way. I remember her walking out of the hall and the feeling of the cord going taut and then snapping when she was gone. I spent 7 years thinking I imagined it." "You didn't imagine it." "No." He looked at her with those gold eyes that their son had inherited. "I want to know the person in front of me. the one with the calluses and the clay jug path, and the son who knows the Latin name for every mushroom in this river valley. That is the person I want to know. I am asking if she will let me. Mira looked at the stars. She breathed the cold air. She counted 10 seconds of silence because she had learned on the highland that silence was not an absence of meaning but its most concentrated form. Tomorrow, she said. His brow shifted. Tomorrow what? Tomorrow we start. Tonight I need to sleep. I haven't slept a full night in 7 years. Something happened to the hard line of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The beginning of one, from a man who had clearly forgotten how. She went back to the tent. She lay down beside Jasper and listened to his breathing, steady and deep. And somewhere outside she was aware of Orin standing in the cold, and she fell asleep faster than she had since before the banishment. The 3 days that followed were not what she expected. She had imagined the weight of a new territory the way you imagine any new cage. Different dimensions, same walls. What she found instead was that Orin gave her space with a restraint that cost him something visible. She could see it in the way his hands would half move toward her and stop, in the way he positioned himself near exits but never between her and them. He spent mornings with Jasper. He sat on the ground outside the tent and let the boy explain his book collection. All 3 of them, the Surveyor's Guide, and the folk tales and the military list of names, with the complete attention of a man learning a language he had not known he needed. On the 2nd day, Jasper asked him to explain what he did. I manage a territory, Orin said. I make decisions about how people in it live and whether they're protected. Jasper thought about this. Does it work? Mostly. What about when it doesn't? Then I figure out why, and I do it differently. Jasper looked at him with the evaluating expression he gave to problems he was deciding whether to take seriously. Okay, he said. That's a reasonable answer. Orin looked at Mira over the boy's head, and his expression was the most naked thing she had ever seen on a grown man's face. On the 3rd day, a rider came in hard from the east. There was a skirmish on the Stonebreak border, a rival pack pushing into a settlement in the southern reach, burning livestock barns, moving toward the inhabited cluster near the river fork. She watched Orin transform, not physically, but she watched the man who had been sitting on the ground listening to her son talk about mushrooms become something else. All the soft parts retreating, everything sharpened, the command voice coming out of him like it had been stored there at pressure, waiting. He came to her before he left. He stood in the doorway of her tent, already armored, and he looked at her the way people look at things they are not sure they will see again. I will come back, he said. She said, I know, because someone who waits 7 years for something doesn't abandon it once it's in front of them. He looked at her for 3 seconds. He crossed the room. His hands came up to her face, both of them, carefully, thumbs along her jaw, and he pressed his forehead to hers, and she felt the bond between them pulse like a second heartbeat finding the rhythm of the first. 2 days, he said. He left. She sat with Jasper in the tent opening and watched the war party move out, horses and wolves, and the low, purposeful sounds of people who had somewhere to be, and then the valley went quiet. On the 2nd night, Mira woke from a dream she did not remember with her heart already running and her hand already on the knife under the blanket. Jasper was sitting up in the dark, completely still. His eyes were glowing, not the reflection of firelight, not the shine of wolf eyes catching an angle of light, glowing a pale gold luminescence, steady and sourceless, and when she reached for him his skin was fever-hot, and his breathing was measured in the deliberate way of a person doing something that requires concentration. Jasper. She put her hands on his face. Jasper, come back. He blinked. The glow did not dim. He's hurt, Jasper said. His voice was wrong, too even, too distant, like sound coming from underwater. The shoulder. Something bit him that isn't a wolf. A yellow tooth, the big one, with the broken leg. They bite and the wound goes cold and you can't shift back, and then, his voice wavered, and then you stop. Mira was already moving. She went to Tiele's tent, and she did not knock. Tiele was awake before Mira finished explaining, sitting up with the focused expression of someone whose job had trained them to process impossible things quickly. Yellow-tooth venom, Tiele said, and her face went careful. It locks the shift. If he can't shift back, where? Mira said. The river Oxbow to the south. It bends there below the sandstone ridge. My son told me there's a sandstone ridge where the river bends like a sleeping hand. Can you get me there? Tiele looked at her. She looked at Jasper standing in the tent opening, eyes still that steady, unearthly gold. She got up and started pulling on her boots. They rode south in the dark, Mira on a grey horse she had never met before, and trusted immediately because the animal was calm the way Orin was calm, from mass and competence rather than innocence. Jasper rode in front of Tiele, eyes normal again, but his jaw set in the particular way that meant he was tracking something no one else could perceive. His directions were exact. They found the Oxbow at first light. Sandstone walls rose red in the early sun. The river bending in the curve Jasper had described, and at the base of the cliff, a wolf the color of storm clouds, massive, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, lying on its side in the mud, panting in shallow intervals, a wound on its shoulder, swollen and dark at the center with black lines radiating outward through the skin like ink pressed into wet paper. The Stonebreak soldiers surrounding it were keeping their distance. The wolf was still dangerous, still snapping, still tracking motion, but its movements were degraded, the reflexes off, the precision gone. It could not shift back. She could see it trying. She could see the way the body kept gathering itself and then failing, like a door that won't catch its latch. Tiele said, "The venom metabolizes in the bloodstream. There's no antidote in the field manuals. The best we can do is—" Mira dismounted. "Mira," Tiele said. She walked past the soldiers. They moved aside. Not because she told them to, because of the quality of her face, which was the face of a woman who had spent 7 years becoming someone that things moved for. The wolf snarled at her. Its lips pulled back from teeth, the length of her fingers, and its breath came in a hot gust smelling of copper and infection. Its eyes were lost, the person behind them unreachable, buried under the venom and the pain. She knelt in the mud. She put both hands on the wolf's face, one on each side of the jaw. It thrashed. The teeth snapped close enough that she felt the displacement of air on her wrist. "Orin," she said, "come back." She did not shout it. She did not beg it. She said it the way she told Jasper to close the shutters. The way she said everything, clearly, without drama, as a statement of what was expected. The wolf went still. Something happened that Mira would spend the rest of her life trying to understand. Her wolf, the weak, half-formed wolf that the Duskmoor pack had dismissed as defective, that she had spent years accepting as simply what she was, woke up. Not gradually, all at once, like a room filling with light when someone opens a window that has been nailed shut. It was not small. Tiele would describe afterward, carefully, and in the clinical language of a woman who needed clinical language to process what she had witnessed, that the woman's hands had emitted something. A quality of energy that moved along the venom tracks in the wolf's body like water, finding its level, like the venom recognized something in the warmth of her hands and let go. She would describe how the black lines retreated, how the swelling reduced, how the wolf's breathing slowed from shallow and rapid to deep and even. What she would not describe, because she had no vocabulary for it, was the sound Mira made. Not a howl, not a word. Something older than both that came from a place below the sternum, and resonated at a frequency that made every wolf in the Oxbow lower its head. Orin shifted back. One moment the wolf. The next, a man, gasping, shaking, the wound on his shoulder open and raw but clean, the darkness drained from it, the black lines gone. He was on his hands and knees in the river mud, and she was already there, her hand on his shoulder over the wound, the warmth still moving through her palms. He looked up at her with those pale gold eyes. "Your wolf," he said. "I know that is not what you told me you had." "No." She looked at her hands. The last light in them was fading. "I thought I knew what I was. I was wrong." The ride back was slow. Orin could sit the horse, but barely straight, listing to his wounded side, and Mira rode beside him and let the silence be what it needed to be, which was the space where two people absorbed information that rearranged their understanding of themselves. The pack healer at the stonebreak seat was a woman named Ceres, who had the efficient manner of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by what people survived. She examined the wound and its edges and looked at Mira. "A purifier healed this," she said. Mira did not know the word. Ceres explained it. "A bloodline of wolves, rare, almost vanished from the recorded lineages, whose gift was not combat or strength but restoration, the clearing of corruption from a wound, the callback of a lost wolf. There had been one recorded in the Snow Ridge line over 100 years past. The line had been thought extinct. What was your father's name?" Ceres asked. "I never knew him. He was a rogue. My mother said he came from the Western Territories and left before I was born." "The Western Territories," Ceres said carefully. "Before the territorial collapse 40 years ago, there were 3 purifier lineage wolves recorded in the Western Highland clans. When the clans fell, the survivors scattered. Some went rogue, some hid entirely." She looked at Mira for a long moment. "Your wolf was suppressed, not absent. Suppressed, by low rank, by isolation, by years of being told what you were. The bond likely triggered the beginning of the awakening. The crisis finished it." She paused. "Your son, Jasper." Mira said his name and felt the familiar weight of it. "He sees things. Remotely. He found Orin in the oxbow. He knew exactly where, and he knew what was wrong." Ceres sat with this, a purifier's gift and a seer's sight, both in one child. She was quiet for a moment. "I would like to do a lineage trace," she said. "With your permission, do it." Orin found her that evening on the wall walk above the gate, looking east at the highlands she had come from. The peaks were visible even at this distance, blue-gray and permanent, their snow lines white against the early dark. He stood beside her. He left a foot of space. "Ceres told me," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Duskmoor had you cleaning floors," he said. His voice was not angry, something older than anger, the resigned exhaustion of someone confronting the specific cruelty of systems that destroy what they can't understand. "I know what I was there," she said. "I know what I was told I was. I spent 29 years building a life around what I was told, and now you're asking me to rebuild it around something else." She looked at her hands on the stone wall. "I don't know who I am if I'm not the woman who made do," he said. "You are the woman who survived 7 years at elevation, alone, and raised a child who can see into another man's pain from a mile away, and knew exactly which mushroom would reduce his fever when he was sick last spring and is 6 years old, and has already read your military history, twice looking for patterns. That is not someone who made do. That is someone who made something." She looked at him. The starlight found the planes of his face, and she let herself look properly for the first time. "I will not be managed," she said. "Not by a bond, not by a lord, not by any claim on me that I didn't make myself. I know. If I stay, it is my choice. If I leave, it is my choice. And if anything about the way you run your territory conflicts with what I need for my son," he said, "the door is open. I mean this the way it sounds, not as a courtesy. My mother spent her life inside a door that only opened from one side. I watched what that did to her. The door is open. If you stay because this is what you want. If you leave, I will watch you go, and I will let it destroy me, and I will let it." Mira looked at the highlands, the mountains she had lived inside for 7 years that had kept her alive and kept her imprisoned and been both of those things at once. "I'll stay the winter," she said. He turned his head. "Just the winter," she said. "We'll see what happens." "We'll see what happens," he repeated, and the words sounded different in his mouth, heavier, like stones placed along a path. She went inside. She sat beside Jasper, who was already asleep, his small face open and unguarded, one hand still loosely curled around the piece of obsidian from the creek. She put her hand over his and felt his breathing even and deep, and she did not lie awake because for the first time in 7 years the silence outside the door felt like safety rather than its absence. The claiming ceremony was not ceremonial. There was no procession, no recitation of the old words, no ritual elements carried forward from the lineage texts. There was a fire in the main hall of the stonebreak seat, and the entire pack gathered in the way that packs gather, not on command but by instinct, pulled by the gravity of something that mattered. Jasper stood at the front beside Tieb, who had positioned herself next to him with the protective posture of someone who had decided this was her assignment and intended to carry it out regardless of whether anyone had formally given it to her. He wore a new shirt he had gotten a grass stain on within the first hour. Orin stood at the center of the hall without his armor, just a dark shirt and his scars and the kind of stillness that comes from a man who has stopped fighting what he is. Mira walked to him. He took her left hand. He turned it over and pressed his mouth to the scar on her wrist, the one the Duskmoor blade had left, the one that ached in the cold. He kissed it slowly, deliberately, and didn't look up while he did it, and every person in the hall understood what the gesture meant without being told. This scar. This is what was done. This is what I think of what was done. Mine, he said, softly. To her, she looked at him. This man who was too large for most rooms and who had waited, without knowing he was waiting, for 7 years. Mine, she said back. The bond opened like a door. She felt it hit the way she had felt her wolf wake, all at once, without warning, a flooding of warmth through her chest that knocked down everything she had been holding up. Not destroyed, dissolved, because the walls were no longer doing anything, because she had walked in from the cold. She bit him and he bit her, and the pack erupted in sound, not applause. Howls, the full-throated involuntary response of a pack, feeling a new bond click into place. Dozens of connections firing at once, the vibration of it in the stone floor, in the rafters, in the marrow of her bones. Jasper howled too. He opened his mouth, and the sound that came out was too large for a 6-year-old's body, resonant and deep and reaching, and it joined the chorus and something in Mira's chest that had been drawn tight for 7 years simply let go. TL was not crying. She was grinning so hard the expression looked structural. 6 weeks later, a rider arrived from the south. She was a woman Mira didn't recognize, traveling worn, thin in the way of someone who had been moving without rest, with the look of a person who has been doing something difficult on purpose and has not allowed themselves to stop and think about how difficult it is. She found Mira at the gate, not Orin. "My name is Fenwick," she said. "I'm the Duskmoor Alpha's daughter. My father is dead. He died last month, and when I went through his records, I found your name. I found 7 names. He banished 7 unmated wolves in the 3 years before you. I've spent the last 4 weeks trying to find out what happened to them." She opened the leather case she was carrying, 6 names inside, with locations, with conditions, with the specific handwritten details of a person who had actually gone and looked. 6, not 7. "The 7th, Fenwick said. "I haven't found her yet. Her name is Dalla. She was banished 5 years before you, 2 months pregnant. I'm still looking." Mira took the case. She looked at the 6 names, 6 lives reduced to location and condition by her own Alpha's choices, scattered into the territories like something discarded. "You didn't have to do this," Mira said. Fenwick looked at her. Her jaw was, "Yes, I did," she said. "He was my father, and what he did is in my name now. The only thing I can do with that is make it smaller." Mira studied her, the dust on her clothes, the shadows under her eyes. The set of a person who has found something to do with their hands and will not stop until it's done. "There's food in the hall," she said, "and a room in the east wing." "Sleep tonight," Fenwick nodded. She took 2 steps toward the main house and stopped. She said, without turning around, "I heard what they did at the border. When they brought you out in front of everyone and cut the bond. I wasn't there. I was 12. But I heard." She didn't say anything else. She went inside. Mira stood at the gate holding the leather case. The wind came down from the east, cold and clean, carrying the smell of pine and the distant hint of the first proper snowfall of the season. From the training yard, she could hear the ring of sparring practice, and underneath it, Jasper's voice asking a question in that precise, serious way he had. From the herb garden behind the main house, she could hear Ceres teaching her lineage tracing method to Jasper, who had apparently appointed himself her assistant. The bond hummed in her chest, warm and constant. She felt Orin somewhere in the main house, felt his awareness of her like a hand resting at the small of her back, present without pressing. She folded the leather case under her arm. She looked at the eastern highlands, the long ridge of peaks that had been her whole world. For 7 years, still there, still blue and white and enormous. She did not miss them the way she had expected to. They had made her and they had held her, and she had loved them the way you love the thing that kept you alive even when the keeping was brutal. But the fire was going inside. Tiel had left something on the table, bread and a pot of the cloven honey drink, and a small, unnecessary note that said only tomorrow's training, 6 a.m., bring the boy. And the note was sitting on the table beside the bread and was in its way the most ordinary and complete thing Mira had ever been given. She went inside. Jasper came in from the garden with soil on his boots and 3 dried herb bundles in his arms that he had apparently been trusted to carry unsupervised. He set them on the table with the seriousness of someone completing a delivery. Ceres says these need to hang for 2 weeks, he said. He looked at the bread. Can I have some? She tore a piece and handed it to him, and he ate it standing up the way he always had, quickly and without waste, the habit of a child who had learned that meals were not guaranteed. Then he slowed down. He chewed the second bite more slowly. He reached for another piece without checking her face first to see if it was allowed. It was such a small thing. She almost missed it. Orin appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame and watched his son eat bread at the table, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has been underwater for so long that the feeling of air on his face is almost unrecognizable, and he is standing very still so as not to disturb it. Jasper looked up. He held out the end of the bread loaf across the table. There's enough, Jasper said. It's always enough here. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and quiet, and covering everything evenly, the way snow did, without preference, without memory of what lay underneath.